we're all just still struggling to process this. She was on an access visit with her father, yes. She was in his care.
A 4-year-old girl and her father are found dead in a conservation area. Search and rescue crews found the bodies at the base of an escarpment at the popular hiking spot in Milton. Greg Ross spoke with the little girl's mother today.
Kira loved to dress up, so she wanted to wear, like, I'm a total tomboy, but this girl, she loved to be fancy. She loved her fancy shoes. She loved her, her princess dresses. She loved to do her hair in little bows, with family.
An emotional Jennifer Kagan shows pictures of her 4-year-old daughter, Kira, who was found dead yesterday, along with her biological father, Robin Brown.
She was on an access visit with her father, yes. She was in his care this weekend.
But Kagan says she received a call from Halton Police yesterday, notifying her that Kira and her father had been reported missing after going to spend the day at Rattlesnake Point Conservation Area in Milton.
So it is our understanding the father and daughter attended there for a hike at somewhere between 2:30 and 3 p.m. and were due back at 5:30. And when they did not return, we were contacted shortly after, about 7:30 p.m.
Police would not confirm who made the missing persons report, but after searching for several hours, they found the bodies of Kira and her father.
So the victims were located at the base of the escarpment. There were significant trauma on the victims that could be consistent with a fall.
It's every parent's absolute worst nightmare. It still feels like a nightmare. I pinch myself thinking, I'm going to wake up from this, and you don't.
Police are now looking for any witnesses who were at Rattlesnake Point yesterday evening. And while police are not calling it a homicide, the homicide unit has taken over the investigation.
I just spent quite a few hours with the homicide detectives, and they are thoroughly investigating. They have assured me that they are investigating.
Kira was a student at Bialik Hebrew Day School in Thornhill. Today, the school sent out a statement that said, "We offer our sincere condolences to the family. School counseling services are being made available to students to provide the necessary support." Kira was supposed to return home to her mother, stepfather, and 9-month-old brother Joseph today. Kagan says, tragically, he will never really know his big sister.
You can see the way she holds this little baby. Like, she always wanted to hold him and touch him and connect with him every morning.
Greg Ross, CBC News, Thornhill.
Rotating one-day strikes are continuing to shut down some schools in the GTA today. Elementary teachers are off the job in Halton and Durham, and tomorrow the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario will hold a province-wide strike. Teachers in Toronto will also be holding a walkout Wednesday, and French school teachers are planning a province-wide strike on Thursday. As the job escalation continues, some students say they are being put in the middle of the fight between the teachers and the government. The Toronto Catholic District School Board says a recent escalation of administrative job action has forced them to cancel a major high school swim meet. Farah Morelli has more.
This is SJPII, which is our school and then just swim team.
For Kiara Alcantara, swimming is life.
I started to learn how to swim, I think at maybe 10 months old. So I've kind of been doing this thing my whole life.
She's captain of the team at St. John Paul II High School and practices twice a day. Last week, she learned the swim meet of the season, the TDCAA, was being canceled.
My immediate reaction was just complete shock, because this is the meet that we all work for the entire season. It's the meet that lets us qualify for OFSA, which is basically the biggest meet that we know of that we can go to as a school.
When you hear that this meet is being canceled because of the teachers union's job action, how does that make you feel?
It's really disappointing, especially since they say that they're fighting for us. And it to me personally, it hurts, because I worked, as well as the rest of our team, we all worked really hard for it to just be taken away from us.
Last week, OECTA announced it was stepping up administrative job action. In a statement, it denied any extracurricular activities are being affected, but the Toronto Catholic District School Board says part of their new job action prevents teachers from dispersing their kids and they had no choice but to cancel the swim meet.
And essentially what that means is students that would not be attending a swim meet would be dispersed into another teacher's classroom. And one of the job actions is saying not to do that, so not to accept dispersed students. So it really makes it difficult to know what to do with those students.
For Kiara, that's the end of the road for this year's swimming season. There are no more meets. She has this message for both sides in the dispute.
It just hurts being stuck in the middle of something that we can't control and something that we never really asked for.
Farah Morali, CBC News, Toronto.
Now the strikes are happening because negotiations are stalled, and one of the key sticking points at the bargaining table is a rule that prioritizes seniority in teacher hiring.
Having to choose a physical education, a phys ed teacher to teach math because of the most tenured, quote, the most experienced amount of years in this class, but not necessarily years teaching the subject matter at hand. And if a parent knew that the system is premised on seniority and not on qualifications, not on merit, not on equity considerations, I think they'd expect the government to demonstrate an element of resolve to try to see that regulation lifted in part or removed in totality.
Or maybe, yeah, I don't know.
Right now, the rule kicks in when school boards are hiring for long-term or permanent teaching positions. It says boards must choose from 5 qualified applicants with the most seniority that are on the roster of supply teachers. Now, the province says the rules give boards no latitude in hiring decisions. The union accuses the government of misrepresenting the rule, saying it does not mean unqualified teachers are getting jobs. Rather, seniority is just a factor in the hiring process. Meanwhile, Toronto's outside workers could soon see job action of their own. A no-board report was received by the city today, meaning QP Local 416 could go on strike or be locked out as early as February 27th. The union represents outside workers, including garbage collectors east of Yonge Street. The city says issues include job security, wages, benefits, and parental leave. Resistance to a pipeline project continues to simmer in BC. The federal government says they are monitoring the situation after protests led to RCMP intervention and multiple arrests.
It's a legal project, and law enforcement officials are working to ensure that the legality of the project can be continued. My sense is that they're doing a good job. We expect that for any project that's abiding by the laws in Canada, that we should have that similar approach. We also know that we live in a country where people are allowed to express their point of view.
Some protest camps inside Wet'suwet'en territory west of Prince George were dismantled by police in recent days. And earlier today, 33 demonstrators were arrested at the Port of Vancouver. Now, critics argue this is not about pipelines, but about Indigenous sovereignty. Protests in solidarity with the chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en have popped up around the country.
The RCMP has no jurisdiction on that land. We also are demanding that they release the arrested, the land protectors and water protectors, because they did nothing wrong. They are following the Wet'suwet'en law, which is the law of the territory they live on.
Some young protesters moved in on the Department of Justice in Ottawa to press Attorney General David Lametti to call off the RCMP and in the BC standoff. They say they'll stay put until he meets them to hear their concerns. A 1997 Supreme Court ruling recognized some 22,000 square kilometers of territory in that area as unceded Wet'suwet'en land. But pipeline construction in the area has the signed agreement of 20 area First Nations. Here in the GTA, protesters have been blocking train tracks east of the city for days in solidarity with the anti-pipeline demonstrations in BC. And once again today, that meant via rail passengers had to find other ways to get to their destinations. Natalie Kalata joins us live now from Union Station. And Natalie, mixed reactions from travelers affected by all of this.
Very much so, Dwight. In fact, you can see behind me, we are in Union Station, a busy hub of activity. And if you take a look right behind me here, you can see it right there written on the signs. Canceled trains to Ottawa, Kingston, and Montreal. All of this, of course, driven by individuals, passengers who are both upset but also supporting the protesters. Dozens of passengers this morning had little choice but to trade in their train ticket for a bus ride. For some, like Michelle Roline, there's more at stake.
And I was concerned, perhaps I'm going to lose my job.
Roline was in Toronto visiting her daughter. When the protests started this weekend, she was trapped and couldn't get out.
We're just innocent people just going about our lives. A lot of us need to go back home to work, and we're just stuck here.
Protesters near Belleville blocked the tracks again today to show solidarity with BC demonstrators. They're opposing the construction of a pipeline that crosses the Wet'suwet'en territory. RCMP officers in BC have arrested people for breaching a court injunction. An injunction order to remove protesters from the site near Belleville has been granted, but so far no one has been arrested, and demonstrators today are standing their ground.
The big thing about Native people is we're people of the land. And if we don't stand up now and start looking after our land, there's going to be nothing left for any people.
Via Rail says the coordinated protests in Ontario affected trains traveling from Montreal to Toronto, Toronto to Ottawa, and Toronto to Kingston. As of noon Sunday, 92 trains across the country have been cancelled, impacting more than 16,000 people. Leaving many in Toronto today scrambling to find another way home, and some struggling with why.
I was a little bit mad at first, but then I started to read about it and I figured, well, okay, kind of understand their point.
I had to scramble to get away there. There's no flights available, so here I'm getting on the bus.
Protest is protest, that's fine. It's just I wish that we knew more and it was a bit predictable.
And no one can predict when it might all end.
It could go on as long as it needs to.
Now, in a statement to CBC News, Via Rail said that they will be giving passengers 3 hours notice if their departure is canceled. They'll also be automatically refunding those passengers who have been affected. And of course, they're reminding everyone to check online before heading to the station. Dwight?
Thank you, Natalie. So, Colette, the snow came and then it melted all the way.
Yeah, what a mild day. What a nice way to start the week. Monday with some sunshine and temperatures above seasonal. In many cases, we're kind of borderline about 5 degrees above seasonal for our daytime highs. These are your unofficial numbers. But if you look at southern and eastern Ontario, everybody above freezing except the nation's capital. -1 is what they're looking at there. Well, our temperatures come down a little bit. We're right around 1 degree now, and seeing some of that cloud cover that was thickening up into the later afternoon hours, we're going to continue to see that cloud cover through the overnight hours. So quite a bit of cloud moves in. And the other thing that's going to be happening here is as we get into tomorrow into the afternoon hours, the winds are going to turn towards the west and pick up a little bit. So because of that, now, by the way, in the afternoon, we might get some sunny breaks in here, so that's not too bad. But then those clouds fill right back in, and we start to see some squalls wanting to set up there. Again, this is more towards the north of the GTA, but some of those flurries or a little bit of light precipitation could make its way in tomorrow evening. Most of the day is going to be dry and not a big concern in terms of active weather. Wednesday starts off quite nicely. It will end dramatically different, though. Overnight Wednesday into Thursday, we do have a snowstorm that's going to move through and some real changes in our temperatures coming at the end of the week. So I'm going to talk about all of that coming up. For now, I'm going to tell you that your overnight low is -5. It should be closer to -10, way above seasonal here. And tomorrow afternoon, heading to highs of 2 to 3 degrees, although a little bit breezy. Dwight.
Thank you, Colette.
You're welcome.
Ontario health officials say the risk of coronavirus in the province remains low, but out of an abundance of caution, they are ramping up their monitoring for the virus.
As far as our monitoring, we're going to be at this for certainly for the next month anyways, as we continue to monitor and be persuaded that it actually is abating and going down, and that we can ease off some of our methods there.
I mean, we, had the experience of SARS where we let it go, and then it was there, and that was very unfortunate, and we're not going to let that happen again.
So as they're changing
officials say
that,
there are still just 3 confirmed cases of the coronavirus in the province. They are currently investigating 8 other potential cases. They also say they are closely watching the situation with the virus in China to see if government's attempts at containing it are successful. The UN Health Agency says it is growing concern about the potential of the virus spreading from people with no travel history to China. It comes after at least 2 such cases were reported, one in France and another in the UK.
The detection of this small number of cases could be the spark that becomes a bigger fire. But for now, it's only a spark. Our objective remains containment.
The WHO has now sent a team of medical experts to China to help investigate the ongoing outbreak. In China, 974 people have died, with more than 40,000 confirmed cases. Outside China, there has been 1 death in the Philippines and at least 319 cases of infection in 24 countries. That includes Canada, which has 7 confirmed cases. A quarantine cruise ship in Japan now has the highest concentration of cases outside of China. The number of people infected with the coronavirus has doubled to 135, including 8 Canadians. There are more than 200 other Canadian passengers aboard the Diamond Princess. The luxury cruise ship has been under strict quarantine ever since it arrived in Yokohama last Monday. Chris Brown has more.
It was a day of bad news, really the worst news that passengers did not want to hear. A big jump in the number of cases, including 1 more Canadian. Also, a large number of Japanese people have tested positive, 11 Americans as well, and 5 crew members. The big question now is, how in fact did they get sick? Well, not too many clues coming from Japan's health ministry, but a few are coming from Princess Cruises, specifically from the captain, who's been making announcements to passengers. He suggested to them that, in fact, they probably had these symptoms, they probably had the virus before this quarantine began. So that might come as some sense of relief that perhaps, the virus isn't spreading, but we haven't, again, heard that from the health ministry. On the other hand, clearly, some people are feeling sick, so they're going in to get tested, and hence we have these results. A couple of new things have come out of that for people on board the ship. On the positive side, some people on inside cabins are going to get a chance to come outside a little bit more, so they're going to have their ability to walk around and get some fresh air improved. On the other hand, they're going to have to wear masks whenever they open up the door, whenever they even get their food, have any kind of interaction with the outside of their room at all. We saw a lot of activity today, lots of ambulances parked right beside the ship. We saw a lot of them coming and going, a lot of people in white hazmat suits, almost walking in military precision to and from various buildings and to the ship as well. And we also saw some military vehicles, too, that seemed to form a tent just outside of the ship that was had a sealed way going into the ship. But what they were doing there, we really don't know. Very few details coming tonight from Japan's government. Chris Brown, CBC News in Yokohama.
A second government-chartered flight is now heading back to Canada, bringing home Canadians who wanted to leave Wuhan, the epicenter of the virus outbreak in China. There are 185 passengers on a plane now making its way to Trenton. They will join 213 others who are staying at a military base after they were airlifted from China last week. The evacuees at CFB Trenton undergo daily checkups. Health officials say none of them has shown any symptoms of the virus. All those repatriated, including the new arrivals, must remain in quarantine for 2 weeks before they can leave the base and return to their own homes. After the break, a historic night at the Oscars.
I really want to thank our Korean film audience. Without you, we are not here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Parasite becomes the first non-English film to win Best Picture. More on the evening's big moments coming up next.
The weather update is brought to you by Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand. It's hard to stop a train.
how much the Oscars have changed in the past 92 years.
Yeah, they changed a lot, Steve.
Yeah, they have. You know, back in 1929, there were no black acting nominees.
Yeah. And now in 2020, we got one.
Yes.
This is really great, and I dedicate this to all the Indigenous kids in the world who want to do art and dance and write stories. We are original storytellers, and we can make it here as well.
Guys, we're not mad. That was an act.
Yeah.
And the Oscar goes to Parasite.
Some of the big moments from last night's Academy Awards and a huge Oscar first, a Best Picture win for a non-English language film, Parasite. Parasite's big win wasn't the only history made last night, and that's not exactly a good thing. Yelena Azik joins us now to explain a record low night for viewership.
It was not good. Dwight, did you help those numbers? Did you watch?
I did not.
Dwight!
The family wanted to go out for dinner. I said, the Oscars are on. They're like, no, we don't care.
Did anybody here watch the Oscars? Honestly. Okay. So
One person.
One person's yelling that they watched. Okay, so this is the number we're talking about. Record low. The viewership was 23.6 mil, which sounds great, but it's 20% less than it was before. So it really is something that people are, they're sharing with the memes. They've got the highlights, but they're not really sticking around for the whole show. And sometimes for good reason. I mean, I gotta say, if you look at the opening, of course, it was super energetic. You saw a snippet of it there. I'll show you more of Janelle Monáe as she was dancing and singing and largely acknowledging a lot of the elephant in the room, the lack of diversity. She mentioned a lot of films that weren't nominated and should have been. And that was a bit of a theme that happened throughout the night. It's almost like, ha, 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 isn't this a joke? But at the same time, it's real. So yeah, a lot of people were feeling that after this particular part, the speeches, they weren't that fabulous. There were a few exceptions. You saw a little bit of a snippet there of Taika Waititi. He ended up winning for his movie Jojo Rabbit. He got Best Adapted Screenplay. Now, you heard the clip there when the New Zealand Maori filmmaker, he dedicated his award to Indigenous people there. It was interesting because after that, he gave a land acknowledgement, and that has pretty much never happened at the Oscars in Los Angeles, talking about the ground that they were standing on. So there were these moments that were special in there and a lot of acknowledgements through the back door about diversity. But overall, it really did feel like this was something that they were trying to make up for because, of course, the fact that all of the acting nominees, except for one, they were all white. So yeah, it's clearly they still have a long way to go.
Now, that lack of diversity has been looming over the Oscars recently. And it seems like they continued that theme throughout the night.
It was all the way through. Although this was an interesting attempt, a little bit of effort was put in. When Frozen 2, the song for that ended up winning, Idina Menzel, I just did what John Travolta did. Anyway, she gets up on stage and she starts singing, and they decide to give it a bit of international flair because, of course, the movie has been picked up around the world and translated into lots of different languages. Have a listen.
Everyone I've ever loved is here within these walls. I'm sorry, secret siren, but I'm blocking out your calls. Może chcesz zbić mnie z tropu, żebym gdzieś zrobiła błąd.
Oh, I like that.
So it was kind of a nice touch, right? And of course, we do have to mention what you mentioned there off the top with Parasite being the big winner of the Best Picture. That was the first time that a non-English speaking film ended up taking that big award. So that is worth a lot, obviously. It also won Best International Film, Screenplay, and Best Director. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a snippet too, because this is something that a lot of people are, as you take a look at it there on your screen, a lot of people are talking about that as showing some progress, at least when it comes to diversity at the Oscars.
Now, the show remained hostless.
Yes.
I mean, does that have anything to do with people watching, not watching? Did it work for you?
Listen, well, okay, if you're going to ask me, I do think that kind of fell flat. There were some moments that Chris Rock and Steve Martin, when they came on, they were kind of funny as this fake host kind of thing. But ultimately, it's not just about the hosts keeping our attention. It's about them making us want to watch in the first place. I mean, you and I were talking about your kids, and they weren't even really into it. So it's showing a younger generation isn't even really that keen on it. So this is something that you might want to watch, though, because a lot of people today are talking about, hey, how about these two hosting the next time around? Have a look.
We just know there are a lot of directors here tonight, and
I just wanted them to know we do more than comedy.
oh, that was my line.
Well, I guess it's mine now, son!
How would you know? You were always gone when I was a kid.
See, acting.
So they
Oh, that's
are
hilarious.
funny and smart and adorable. So that would be an interesting choice, of course, Kristen Wiig and Maya Rudolph. So it's just one of those things, Dwight. A lot of people are now just sharing online, and we'll see what happens next year. But for this year, it definitely was a decent overall show, and they are trying. They need to try harder, but you know they'll increase that diversity eventually. I hope.
Thanks, Yelena.
Thank you, Dwight.
Still ahead, Raptors president Masai Ujiri is being sued for this altercation after Toronto won the NBA championship last year. Details of the lawsuit coming up. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is meeting with Canadian troops in Kuwait today. It's the latest stop on his diplomatic trip to Africa and the Middle East. He's on a mission to improve relations with key countries in that part of the world. And as Catherine Cullen tells us, he's also campaigning for international support in Canada's bid to land a seat on the UN Security Council.
Justin Trudeau is only in Kuwait for about 24 hours, but while he's here, he's trying to get a better sense of the political situation, not just in Kuwait, but in the region. He started off by meeting with Canadian troops, shaking hands at Camp Canada, just outside of Kuwait City. He told troops there that he appreciated their work in the fight against ISIS and also said that he was glad that they are safe. Some Canadian troops had been in Iraq, but were moved out of the country in early January, that because of unrest following the death, the killing, in fact, of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani.
I know that you are all trained to deal with the situations. It's the careers you chose, it's the professionalism you have, it's the abilities you have, but a lot of Canadians who always think about you. We're specifically thinking about your safety and thankful for you being here.
Trudeau was also briefed by senior military officials while he was on the base. He then went on to a meeting with Kuwait's prime minister. Tomorrow he will be meeting with more Kuwaiti leadership, and then he moves on to the next leg of his trip in Senegal. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Kuwait City.
Raptors President Masai Ujiri is with the Prime Minister on his trip, but back home, Ujiri is facing a lawsuit for an alleged shoving incident right after the Raptors won the NBA championship last year. Nelly Nanowski is live at Scotiabank Arena tonight, where the Raptors are looking to extend their 14-game winning streak. And Nelly, tell us about this lawsuit.
Well, Dwight, you just said it. We have to go back to Game 6 of the NBA Finals to really remember what happened. Now, the Raptors were playing Golden State in San Francisco in Game 6. They won. That's when Masai Ujiri rushed down to get on the court and celebrate with his team, and he was stopped at that point by a police officer who claims that he never saw Masai's credentials, that he didn't know who he was. An altercation ensued. There was some pushing. Masai did eventually get down to celebrate with the Raptors. And after that whole incident, there was a court that was looking into the matter. They decided not to press charges against Masai Ujiri. So we thought this whole thing was over. Fast forward some 8 months, and it's come back to really haunt Masai. And in this lawsuit, this police officer alleges that he has a concussion from this incident and that the altercation has, quote, it continues to cause the plaintiff great mental, emotional, psychological, physical, nervous pain and suffering, and that the plaintiff further alleges that such injuries resulted in permanent disability. He says that he has been unable to work after all of this happened. Now, we spoke with someone today, Jay Rosales. He has a Raptors podcast. It's a podcast dedicated to the team. It follows the team, and he's been following Masai Ujiri and the team for quite some time, and we asked him today about what he thinks about the lawsuit, and he says that the whole thing is really ridiculous.
There is no history at all of him having any form of violence, whether it's physical or mental or anything of that nature. So seeing this report and seeing all the details of it just blew my mind because, like I said, he doesn't have a mean bone in his body, but at the same time, it's where it's coming from. There are a lot of racial undertones that didn't sit well with me, and I'm sure a lot of Raptors Twitter, at least from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, so some of those racial undertones that Rosales touched on, they're in the lawsuit, and they really try to paint Masai Ujiri as a violent man. And it says in the lawsuit that the Raptors and MLSE really should have known, quote, get this, Dwight, that they knew or should have known that Masai had a violent predisposition and propensity for physical violence. Now, if you look at Masai Ujiri, his history here in the city, there's really no indication that he's a violent person. We haven't seen any form of violence on or off the court, so that's kind of a strange thing, as you mentioned right now, and as Catherine Cullen did. Masai Ujiri is actually in Africa with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau right now, trying to help the Prime Minister get a seat on the Security Council. So it's really a lot to swallow. We're going to be speaking with some fans later on. They're all lined up right now because the Raptors are taking on the Timberwolves Timberwolves tonight, and they're hoping to beat their 14-game winning streak so far, Dwight.
Well, the police didn't find anything in their investigation. We'll see what the civil courts decide. Thank you for that, Natalie. A charge against Toronto City Councillor Mark Grimes that he breached the Municipal Elections Act was withdrawn in court today. Grimes was accused of failing to report thousands of dollars in polling work his campaign allegedly received. John Lancaster has more.
Councillor Mark Grimes.
City Councillor Mark Grimes wasn't in court today as the Crown withdrew the charge. He was accused of benefiting from thousands of dollars of polling data done by a market research company during the 2014 municipal election. But the costs allegedly weren't reflected in his audited campaign spending documents he provided to the city. Today, Crown Attorney Michael Wilson told the court the campaign of Mark Grimes received the benefit of polling data from a company called Campaign Research that was not claimed on his financial statement. The Crown, however, is not in a position to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Councillor Grimes personally requested or received this data, or that he deliberately failed to report the receipt of that data with filing his financial statement. So the charge was dropped. CBC News had previously reported that the OPP had obtained copies of the polling data and emails between Grimes' campaign staff and the polling company discussing the information. In 2018, the OPP charged Grimes with one count of providing a false document related to his campaign spending. Today, Grimes tweeted, "From the beginning, I have maintained that there was no wrongdoing in my part, and there was no basis for the charge. The Crown Attorney's decision today confirms this, and I am pleased that the record is now clear."
Councillor Justin DiCiano.
Former Etobicoke councillor Justin DiCiano was also charged in the same investigation, also accused of breaching the Municipal Elections Act. The OPP spent more than a year investigating the two politicians. In the end today, the charge against Councillor Grimes withdrawn. The Crown hinted the same scenario may play out for former Councillor DiCiano. John Lancaster, CBC News, Toronto.
Many Ontarians will have to pay hundreds of dollars more this year for their car insurance. Average rates will be going up by about 1.5%, but for some, it could be much higher. The provincial regulator has approved rate hikes for about 20 insurance companies. Philippe de Montigny explains.
Tracy Ann Yacoub needs to dish out an extra $244 in car insurance this year, even though her driving record hasn't changed.
I can't understand why our rates have jumped 11%. It's frustrating because there's nothing I can do about it.
Ontario drivers spend on average $1,500 a year on auto insurance. In the GTA, depending on where you live, you could be paying as much as $1,000 more, like in Brampton.
In that postal code area, then your rates go up automatically. And it has nothing to do with your driving record, it's just because of where you live.
We pay some of the highest premiums across the country for the lowest level of benefits.
Those benefits, she says, have been eroding over the years as the previous Liberal government tried to reduce premiums. Even the NDP back in the 90s got elected on a promise to make auto insurance public. But Premier Bob Rae backtracked once in power.
It will cost too much money and it will cost too many jobs.
We understand industry is looking for a profit, but that shouldn't be done at the expense of consumers.
This personal injury lawyer wants the government, for one, to get rid of what she calls a secret deductible.
The first $40,000 of your compensation claim goes to the insurance company of the driver that hurt you. People don't know that. So if you go to trial and the jury gives you $40,000 for pain and suffering, odds are you're going to get zero.
She also believes private insurers should disclose their profits.
We're going to find out there's a lot of profit there, enough to bring down premiums and restore some benefits to injured people.
The Insurance Bureau of Canada says the current regulated system has not benefited consumers or insurers. Premiums remain expensive, and insurers have continued to pay out more in claims and expenses than they earn in premium. The Ford government says there's no silver bullet that will quickly put the brakes on rate hikes. The PCs say their plan could take years to work, but they hope to get it right this time. Philippe de Montigny, CBC News, Brampton.
Is the deck stacked against consumers when it comes to fights with banks? Hundreds of you have written to our Go Public team after hearing the story of a man who says his bank refused to compensate him for money lost through bank fraud. Erica Johnson has more.
It was a strange email for Jeff Harney saying he'd accepted an e-transfer when he hadn't. A fraudster had intercepted it. The money was gone.
My branch manager indicated there was nothing to worry about if it was a fraudulent transaction.
But then the general contractor heard back from his bank. RBC said it wasn't going to reimburse the $1,500 lost to bank fraud.
How clear is that in the banking agreement?
Well, I'd say it's not very clear at all.
RBC pointed to its online agreement, which says the bank is entitled to pay anyone who correctly responds to the e-transfer question and answer.
They've just made this clause which clears themselves of responsibility.
RBC told us it clearly provides information about protecting against e-transfer fraud in its agreement and on its website. Most of the big banks recently updated their online banking agreements. So Go Public asked this contract law professor at the University of Ottawa to assess how fair those agreements are to consumers.
They are so one-sided and benefit the banks to such a degree that there's no way that I would call these ultimately bargained agreements. These are take it or leave it, where the taker really has no option.
Among other things, Dempsey said, the bank's agreements use vague language, limit liability for losses, say they can change the terms at any time, and decide how they'll let you know.
It's just not the way we should have contracts. At some point, I don't think you should even call them contracts anymore.
He says the federal government should require third-party oversight,
where the banks are forced to actually include terms that consumers would accept, not terms that the bank wants them to accept.
Go Public asked the Ministry of Finance whether it would introduce oversight for banking agreements to even the playing field for consumers. It steered us to a voluntary code of conduct, last updated in 2004.
The banks told us they are liable for financial losses in certain situations and that they invest significant revenues to protect clients against fraud. But they emphasize that protections are a shared responsibility with customers. Erica Johnson, CBC News, Vancouver.
Remember, if you have a story you would like us to look into, we would love to hear from you. Just send us an email, torontotips@cbc.ca. Still ahead, an ancient discovery in Alberta. A new species of tyrannosaur has been found, the oldest ever in Canada. More on what researchers are calling the Reaper of Death coming up. A vicious winter storm is blowing across the United Kingdom and Western Europe. So far, there are reports of 6 deaths because of the weather. Hurricane-force winds have been threatening to push waves over coastal seawalls, and heavy rains have caused extensive flooding inland, especially, look at that, in northern England. And check these videos out. The winds have been playing havoc with air travel. Not the smoothest of landings for passengers. You can see the planes wobble as they come in. Hundreds of flights have been grounded in England, Germany, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. But the storm is helping one aspect of air travel. According to Flight Radar 24, a strong jet stream helped a British Airways flight from New York to London set a speed record. It made the cross-Atlantic trek in under 5 hours. That is crazy, Colin.
It is crazy, and that is the impact of the jet stream. The jet stream has enhanced that storm. It's primarily a huge windstorm, but also, pushing those planes along. They're moving at a speed faster than 1,300 kilometers an hour, faster than the speed of sound, in fact. But because they have the help of that tailwind, they don't get to be considered supersonic in this particular case. Well, speaking of the jet stream, it's been having an impact not like that, but on us, because it's been our stream that's been bringing in the tracking of all these different storms. Our temperature there, 1 degree that we're sitting at right now. We're into a slightly quieter pattern for a couple of days, and then that storm track is going to bring the next one. We had the snow last night. We get a little bit of a break, but some cloud cover certainly pushing in overnight tonight. We'll see that thickening up as this moisture stays to the south of us, but we do see a few things going on here, a couple of ingredients that are going to be coming together. So we get a slightly quieter pattern, and tomorrow afternoon the winds start to pick up from the west. We may see a few flurries making their way late day down into the GTA, and there'll be some light squalls. Shouldn't be too significant here, but those winds will be a little bit stronger. But see what's here to the north, some cold air starting to make its way down. The next system coming up from the south is going to come together, and as these two meet, Wednesday's a transition day. By Wednesday night into Thursday, we are talking about another snow event pushing through here. In terms of accumulations, it's still a few days off, so it's sort of hard to tell yet. Looks like maybe 4 to 8, 5 to 10 centimeters here, but over 5 centimeters through the region. And the next important thing about this is that after it moves through and we get into Thursday night and Friday, that much colder air is going to drop in, and it's going to be a major change for us. Wait till you see what the numbers are looking like by the end of the week. So we go for the mild readings, like overnight lows that look like this. We should be closer to -10. We're looking at about -5 and a wind chill near -9. Tomorrow afternoon, still mild then, although it gets breezy into the afternoon hours, and a few of those flurries, could be even a little bit of drizzle, comes into the GTA for the evening. But this is what I'm talking about by the end of the week. We go from that 3, Wednesday 1, Thursday, not a good travel day, okay, with the snow that's going to be pushing through, and then it's going to stick around because Thursday night into Friday, -16. Friday's daytime high, closer to what is a seasonal low, -10. Friday night into Saturday, we're going to be close to -20. We'll likely see some warnings come up at the end of the week there for that cold coming in.
Ouch. Thanks, Colette.
You're welcome.
After the break, Democrats look to move past the Iowa debacle in the New Hampshire primary.
You know, this is the crunch time, so we're just trying to get out there.
Joe Biden's wife, Jill, rallying the troops. Will get you ready for tomorrow's big day in the small state. Next. Contenders hoping to become the Democratic presidential nominees spent the day in New Hampshire ahead of tomorrow's primary vote. While Bernie Sanders appears to have a solid lead, the race is close, and that has triggered some infighting. Katie Simpson has more now from the Granite State.
You will all have a special place in the hearts of the Bidens.
Dr. Jill Biden is trying to rally the troops on her husband Joe's behalf. Meeting with volunteers in Manchester, New Hampshire, Biden insists the former vice president is still in this race.
Well, he's feeling strong. You know, the people of New Hampshire know Joe.
Biden suffered a deeply disappointing fourth-place finish in Iowa, a stunning result given his national frontrunner status. His campaign has now turned negative, targeting former Mayor Pete Buttigieg in a scathing attack ad.
Under threat of a nuclear Iran, Joe Biden helped to negotiate the Iran deal. And under threat of disappearing pets, Buttigieg negotiated lighter licensing regulations on pet chip scanners.
It's nothing out of the ordinary in politics, according to Biden.
No, I'm not concerned about internal fighting. You know, in the end, we are going to support whoever the nominee is.
Though to some, it's a sign of desperation.
It's the point at which a campaign has to really look at the facts on the ground. And if you're not doing the way you'd like to be doing, you need to try something different, and that usually means going negative.
Any perception of infighting is welcome news to supporters of President Donald Trump, who waited in the rain for hours to get a seat at his New Hampshire rally.
I think it's a bit of a mess. I said you can see the division amongst their own party, and I think they're kind of imploding within, and I just think it's a mess.
I think Bernie, but it depends if the Democrats ruin him this time or not. But I can't see any of them beating Trump.
Heading into tomorrow's vote, Senator Bernie Sanders has a clear lead in the polls, followed by former Mayor Pete Buttigieg. But it's Joe Biden who has the most on the line. If he doesn't have a strong performance here, it will be very difficult for his campaign to pick up momentum. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Manchester, New Hampshire.
A new species of tyrannosaur has been discovered in Alberta, the oldest ever found in Canada. Nicknamed the Reaper of Death, the species terrorized southern Alberta 11 million years before the T-Rex. Thanatolthoristes, the guturum, was as long as 2 cars and would have towered over an adult human. It would have been a fearsome predator 79 million years ago, likely preying on those herbivores, you know, those herbivores, right? A University of Calgary researcher led the discovery. It is the first new tyrannosaur species to be found in Canada in 50 years. And I love that stuff out in Alberta. I got to go out there and look at that spot where they're digging up all of these things.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It
really
absolutely is.
All right. What's also fascinating is that winter's back.
Our weather, yeah. We start off with, you know, the week is mild and we're going to take it easy for a couple of days and then everything's going to change up as we get towards the end of the week.
I saw your -10 there, lady.
Yeah, that's coming. So enjoy what we have now. Overnight tonight, mild reading, -5. Yes, we'll see quite a bit of cloud cover, and we have that for tomorrow, a high of 3 degrees. Hopefully some sunny breaks in the afternoon, but then late afternoon, early evening, we may get into a little bit of late flurry activity. Mostly it's to the north of us.
Okay. I was practicing Tainana to some...
Tainana weather?
Yeah, exactly. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Mike Wise had you covered tonight after the National.